ASUS's Zephyrus G16 and Lenovo's Legion 7i are both premium, thinner 16-inch gaming laptops, but they're available for around the same price. So which should you get? I've compared both to find out which is the best. Both laptops are available in light or dark finishes. I just happen to have the Eclipse Grey version of the Zephyrus G16 and the Glacier White version of the Legion 7i. Both laptops look fairly clean. The Zephyrus has ASUS's new slash lighting on the lid, which you can customize a bit through software. Overall build quality feels great with both. They're both all aluminum, and there's only minor flex to the keyboards and lids when pushing hard. The Legion's lid is a bit easier to open, because it sticks out a little in the middle, and it goes back further than the Zephyrus. The Zephyrus is smaller in all dimensions, but honestly, the Legion is still on the more portable side compared to many other 16-inch gaming laptops. The bigger difference is in the weight. The Legion is 26% heavier without the charger, and 36% heavier with the chargers included. The Legion's charger is a little bigger, but it's also more powerful too. The Zephyrus is the lightest 16-inch gaming laptop we've ever tested, coming in slightly under Razer's smaller Blade 14. Impressive stuff. The Legion is still lighter compared to most other 16-inch gaming laptops, but that changes a bit when including the chargers. But the Zephyrus makes a number of compromises to reduce its weight, like less powerful specs. Both of my laptops have Nvidia's RTX 4070 graphics, 32 gigs of RAM, and 16-inch screens. But the Zephyrus uses OLED and has a less powerful but more efficient Intel processor. Both laptops have white-only or RGB keyboard options. My Zephyrus happens to be white-only, but I think the RGB option is one zone, whereas the Legion has per-key customization. They both have 3 levels of key brightness control through keyboard shortcuts, but the Legion software goes further and gives you 9 levels of customization. The Legion has more lighting effects, at least with the per-key lighting option. The Zephyrus has slightly more key travel at 1.7mm compared to the Legion's 1.5. And yeah, I think it feels a little nicer, but it's subtle. I liked typing on both keyboards. They're both nice. The keycaps on the Legion are more rounded than square, and I like that it has bigger arrow keys. The Legion has a numpad, but the Zephyrus does not, in favor of front-facing speakers. The touchpads on both laptops are great, but the Zephyrus has a quieter click and is much larger. The touchpad should be centered with regards to the letter keys, and because the Zephyrus doesn't have a numpad, this means its touchpad is also centered on the laptop, whereas the Legion's is over to the left a bit. The Legion's power button doubles as a fingerprint scanner, which works fast and accurately. The Zephyrus does not have one. I think the Zephyrus wins in terms of ports. The Legion has its HDMI 2.1 output and power input on the back, which I prefer as it keeps bulkier cables out of the way. The G16 has no ports on the back. On the left side, they both have a Thunderbolt 4 Type-C port, 3.5mm audio combo jack, and USB 3.2 Type-A port, but the G16's is faster Gen 2. The Zephyrus also has its HDMI and power input here, while the Legion has an extra Type-C port. On the right, they've both got a full-size SD card slot, USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C ports, and USB 3.2 Type-A ports. But again, the G16 supports faster Gen 2. It's also nice that the G16's ports are closer to the back, which helps keep plugged-in stuff out of the way of your mouse hand. Both laptops support charging over USB Type-C with 2 of their Type-C ports. For the Legion, it's the 2 Type-C ports on the left side, and for the Zephyrus, it has 1 Type-C port on either side that can be used for charging, which personally I prefer because it gives you the option of which side you want to plug the cable in. Type-C charging on the Zephyrus goes up to 100 watts, and the Legion supports 100 watts too. But technically, if you use a special Lenovo charger, it can go up to 140 watts. Now, those same 2 Type-C ports that can be used to charge the laptops also have DisplayPort support for connecting monitors, but only the newer Zephyrus G16 offers the new DisplayPort 2.1 standard on its left port. All of the others are DisplayPort 1.4, which is pretty standard. But that new 2.1 port has more bandwidth for supporting higher resolutions at higher refresh rates. Alright, with Optimus turned on, down, one of the Type-C ports on both of these laptops connects to the Intel integrated graphics. But if you turn Optimus off, that same port on the Zephyrus instead connects to the NVIDIA discrete graphics. However, on the Legion, that port simply stops working for display output. So if you turn Optimus off on the Legion, only one of the Type-C ports gives you display output instead of two on the Zephyrus. But the second Type-C port on both of these laptops always connects directly to the NVIDIA graphics, whether Optimus is on or off, and that's the same with HDMI on both laptops too. The Legion was easier to open and get inside. It has fewer screws, uses the more common Phillips head rather than the G16's TR6 screws, and the G16 also has rubber covers over two of the rear screws for some reason. At least they're easy to remove. Once inside, both laptops have their batteries down the front, two PCIe Gen 4 M.2 storage slots, and a Wi-Fi 6E card. The Legion has two SODIMM memory slots, while the Zephyrus has soldered memory, which can never be upgraded. This is one of the biggest trade-offs of the G16's thinner and lighter design, and this is why it's got such a lower upgrade score compared to the Legion. In the US, it seems like the G16 is only available with 16 gigs of RAM in the RTX 4070 configuration, but here in Australia, I was able to get it with 32 gigs. In the US, they make you spend more for the RTX 4080 version if you want 32 gigs. So with the Zephyrus, you have to buy the RAM you need in the future up front. But for the Legion, even if you want to buy it with 16 gigs, you could just upgrade to 64 gigs at any time. Steve from Hardware Unboxed recently tested 30 plus games, and found that a few of them were indeed using more than 16 gigs of RAM, at least at max settings with a desktop RTX 4090 at 1440p. Given our 4070s have less VRAM, it's more likely that will fill up and things spill over into memory. He goes on to say that the majority of games today will run fine with 16 gigs. But yeah, when you're spending so much money on a gaming laptop you're going to use for years, I think 32 gigs is a smart move. Both laptops came with PCIe Gen 4 SSDs installed, but the one in my Legion was notably faster. The speeds from the SD card slot were better with the Zephyrus though. Copying footage would be more than twice as fast on the G16. The card doesn't click in for security in either laptop, but it goes in deeper on the G16 and the slot is further back, so less chance of bumping it compared to the Legion. Wi-Fi performance was a little faster with the Legion, despite both laptops having the same Intel 6E Wi-Fi card. Both are well over gigabit speeds though, so this difference won't matter in the real world for most people. They both have speakers underneath on the left and right towards the front, but the Zephyrus also has those front-facing speakers on either side of the keyboard. Now, the Legion speakers are above average compared to other gaming laptops, but the Zephyrus definitely sounds better. The G16 is one of the best gaming laptops I've ever heard, with plenty of bass while staying clearer at higher volume. And speaking of sounds, the Zephyrus plays this sound by default on boot. Fortunately, you can disable it in software or BIOS, but the Legion does not do that. The Latencymon results were a little better with the Legion, at least in terms of highest measured interrupt latency. The Legion has a bigger 99.9 Wh battery compared to the 90 Wh one in the Zephyrus. But despite that, the Zephyrus ended up lasting 49% longer in our YouTube video playback test. A big difference. Intel's Media Lake processors are just more power efficient compared to the more powerful HX chip found in the Legion. Battery life was much closer with a game running though, with the Zephyrus only lasting 5% longer. Let's check out thermals next. Both laptops have heat pipes shared between the CPU and GPU, but the Zephyrus has an extra third fan inside. They both have holes directly over the fans for air intake, and they both exhaust air out of the back. Neither of them can blast hot air on your mouse hand. Both laptops have 4 different performance modes that can be set through software as well as custom fan control. They've both got a nice amount of customization in terms of adjusting CPU and GPU power and temperature limits, but there are more granular options available with the Legion, so Lenovo is better if you like fine tuning. Plus, the Legion's unlocked HX processor means you can enable overclocking in the BIOS, which then becomes available in software. This also allows you to undervolt. However, we have not tested that, as results will vary based on the silicon lottery, aka luck. I like that the Legion's power button changes continuous color so you can easily tell which performance mode you're in at any time. The Zephyrus doesn't do that. The Legion was running cooler than the Zephyrus when doing nothing at idle, and in a combined CPU and GPU stress test, which aims to represent a worst-case full-load scenario. This kind of surprised me. Yes, the Zephyrus is a thinner and lighter laptop with less space for cooling, but the Legion has a higher-tier Intel HX processor with more cores and threads, and it has higher power limits. More power means more heat to remove, but the Legion is handling it fine. The Zephyrus was hitting ASUS's defined GPU power limit in its two highest modes, while the Legion was allowed more power, and was instead hitting Nvidia's voltage limit. Not only was the Legion's GPU getting more power, the CPU was too, yet it was running cooler. The higher power results in the Legion reaching higher clock speeds in most cases. It depends on the performance mode. It's worth noting that although the G16 is clocking the CPU higher in the lowest performance mode, it's actually getting less power, and that's because the HX chip has more cores and threads that need to share the power budget. And it's worth noting the Legion lost about 5% of battery charge after running the stress tests for a couple of hours. This isn't enough to be an issue in practice, but this didn't happen with the Zephyrus despite it having a lower wattage charger, and that's because the G16 CPU and GPU don't use as much power. But less power means less performance, and that's why the Zephyrus was lower in terms of FPS in Cyberpunk 2077. Granted, the difference doesn't look that big here. In the highest performance mode, the Legion was reaching an 8% higher average FPS, but the difference can be much bigger in other games, which we'll get to later. The CPUs can use more power if the GPU is idle, like in Cinebench. The Legion's more powerful 14900HX starts showing off what it can do here, with a 13% higher single-core score and a 32% higher multi-core score. Raw CPU performance is one of the biggest differences between these two laptops, as the HX chip just has more cores, threads, cache, and power. Performance lowers if we unplug the charger and instead run off of battery power. The Legion is one of the better results out of the same selection of laptops, while the Zephyrus drops down a few positions. So the Legion performs better while running on battery power, but this may be why the battery life is better on the Zephyrus. It's more power efficient. The Zephyrus was a little warmer to the touch, with both sitting there idle doing nothing, but they're still comfortable. They're only a little warm feeling with the stress tests running in their lowest performance modes. You want to compare the temperature values rather than the colors here. The next highest performance mode isn't much different. Both laptops are cool on the WASD keys, as air comes in through the keyboard. The back is hot, but you don't need to touch that. The Legion was slightly cooler with the fans maxed out, but the fans are louder too. Let's have a listen. Both laptops were silent when sitting there idle with the fans off. The Legion was a little louder in the higher performance modes with the stress test running, but the difference isn't really that big. The bigger issue is that the fans in the Zephyrus have a high-pitched sound when maxed out, which I found more annoying than the louder Legion. But as we saw in the games earlier, maxing the fans out doesn't actually boost FPS that much. You can play just fine in the second highest mode without boosting the fans. Both laptops have 16-inch screens, but the Legion has two screen options. The Legion is available with a brighter 2560 by 1600 240Hz screen, but my unit has the 3200 by 2165Hz panel. Meanwhile, the Zephyrus G16 just has that one screen option, which is a 2560 by 1600 240Hz OLED panel. Color gamut was only a little better with the OLED panel. Both are excellent results, but color gamut will be lower on the Legion with the lower resolution screen. Lenovo still says it has 100% sRGB, which is okay for gamers, but creators may want more. Brightness isn't too different. The Legion in the red line was only slightly ahead with brightness set to 100%, but don't forget the Legion's 2560 by 1600 panel is rated at 500 nits, so that would have more of a lead. Backlight lead was only minor and not a problem, at least for the Legion, because it doesn't exist at all with OLED. Because there is no backlight, each pixel is controlled individually, so black just means pixels turned off. OLED panels are subject to burn-in, but ASUS have some features built in to help reduce it. It's difficult to say if this is a problem you'll experience, as it depends on how you use the laptop, but it's good that ASUS have some mitigations in place. OLED also means glossy screen, so reflections will be easier to see and can be more annoying depending on your lighting situation and what's behind you. OLED panels are the fastest when it comes to screen response time. I mean, the Legion is quite good for a regular IPS level display. Anything under 5 milliseconds is quick if we're being realistic, but this is definitely an area where OLED has an edge. The total system latency is the amount of time between a mouse click and when a gunshot fire appears on the screen in Counter-Strike 2. The Zephyrus was faster here too, presumably with its faster screen giving it an edge, but the difference is only small and not noticeable for most people. Both laptops have a mux switch, advanced Optimus so you don't have to reboot when swapping between Optimus on or off, and both have G-Sync available when Optimus is off for tear-free gameplay. Both laptops have 1080p cameras. The Zephyrus has IR for Windows Hello Face Unlock, but the Legion does not. But the Legion has a physical camera disconnect switch for privacy, which the Zephyrus does not. Here's how the camera and microphone sound on Lenovo's Legion 7. And this is the Zephyrus G16, which I think sounds a bit better, but I'll let you judge. Alright, now for what you've all probably been waiting for. How do they actually compare in games? We've tested both of them with these settings for best results. Cyberpunk 2077 was tested with our own custom test run, and I've got both laptops highlighted in red. The Legion has a 7% lead in terms of average FPS at 1080p, and both are fairly similar compared to other RTX 4070 gaming laptops we've tested. The gap gets smaller at the higher 1440p resolution, as the processor difference matters less and we start relying more on the GPU. The Legion still has a higher GPU power limit, but it's less than 3 FPS ahead. Not really a difference you'd be too likely to notice in practice. Red Dead Redemption 2 was tested with the game's benchmark, but this game seems to not work so well with Intel's Core Ultra processors, at least based on the fact that Alienware's M16 R2 with the 185H and 4070 graphics is basically the same as the Zephyrus G16, and both are performing worse than cheaper 4060 laptops. This continues at 1440p too, where we would expect the CPU to matter less. But again, the two Core Ultra 9 185H laptops are closer to lower-end 4060 options, and this puts the Legion 7 24% higher in terms of average FPS. Now, don't get me wrong, the game still runs and is playable on the G16. It's just that the Legion is better, but this is just one game. Control is a GPU-heavy game, and the Legion 7 only had a 5% lead in terms of average FPS at 1080p. But the Legion has less dips in performance, as demonstrated by its 22% higher 1% low, and this is likely due to its more powerful processor. The gap gets a little smaller at 1440p, due to the CPU difference mattering less, but the Legion's higher GPU power limit still gives it a bit of an edge. The Legion was always ahead in 3D Mark, but the GPU tests were very close. The Legion's higher tier processor gives it a larger edge in the CPU tests though. The results are a bit more mixed when it comes to content creation. Sometimes the Zephyrus was ahead, other times the Legion was ahead, but in most applications the difference is small. Both laptops have SD card slots and nice screens for creators, but the G16's OLED panel is nicer. Lenovo's BIOS has more customization compared to ASUS's, despite ASUS's visually looking a bit more impressive. Granted, that's my personal opinion. There's just not much you can actually change on the G16 in comparison. The Legion's Linux support is a bit better with an Ubuntu 24.04 live CD. Both laptops had a working keyboard, touchpad, camera, and Wi-Fi. Speakers were fine on the Legion, but were barely audible on the G16, so maybe it needs some extra drivers. All of the keyboard shortcuts on the Legion work in Linux, but the G16's shortcuts for adjusting screen brightness, keyboard brightness, and keyboard lighting effect did not work. Pricing and availability will change over time, so check the links below the videos for updates and current sales. And if either of these laptops does have a good sale, we'll be sure to add it to our gaminglaptop.deals website. We update that every day to include all of the latest sales, so make sure that you check it out regularly to save money on your next gaming laptop with that link below. At the time of recording in August, both of these laptops go for $2,000 at full price, but with their best best sales so far, they've both been available for around $1,600. Now, that's still on the more expensive side if you're just after an RTX 4070 gaming laptop, at least compared to other deals that we've had. And that's just because the Zephyrus and Legion are more portable, premium models. So if you're able to buy both laptops for about the same price, then which should you pick? Let's start out by summarizing how they're similar. They both have nice build quality with that all-metal finish. They both have nice keyboards and touchpads, though I'd say ASUS's were slightly better for both. Wi-Fi performance is similar, and screen brightness and color gamut are pretty similar too, despite the Zephyrus having an OLED panel. Though, as mentioned, that may change a bit depending on the panel you get in the Legion. Alright, now for the differences. The Legion has a higher tier HX processor, which results in higher single-core and multi-core performance. But this is also why the Legion is thicker, heavier, and uses a bigger charger compared to the Zephyrus. But that said, the Legion is still lighter and more portable compared to most other 16-inch gaming laptops. And the Legion's bigger size allows the internals to run cooler, despite using more power. But the Legion's fans are also a little louder in order to achieve that. But the fans in the Zephyrus sound way more annoying if you're maxing them out. But fortunately, you don't really need to do that to improve performance. And along with the faster processor, the Legion also has a higher GPU power limit, so it performs better in games. Most of the time, the difference doesn't seem to be too big. The Legion might have a 7 to 9% FPS boost over the Zephyrus. But it depends on the game. As we saw in Red Dead Redemption 2, the Meteor Lake processor in the Zephyrus just doesn't seem to go too well. But that said, both of these laptops still run games very well. You'll have a great time playing on either of them at the end of the day. The Legion has more upgrade options, as you can upgrade the 2 SODIMM memory sticks, while the memory in the Zephyrus is solid to the motherboard and can never be upgraded. So you've got to buy it with what you might need later in future upfront. You'll have to decide if that trade-off is worth the thinner and lighter machine. I mean, there's a reason that this is the lightest and smallest 16-inch gaming laptop. But despite being smaller and having a smaller battery, the Zephyrus lasted way longer in terms of battery life, which is one advantage of that Meteor Lake chip. The Legion does have better performance while running on battery power though. It just doesn't last for as long. The Legion also has a better BIOS with more customization, better Linux support, a fingerprint scanner, and a camera disconnect switch. But the Zephyrus has better ports in my opinion, better speakers, and an OLED screen, and OLED just has a faster response time than anything else. Not to mention, the colors and contrast just look awesome. But of course, the downsides are the potential for OLED burn-in in future, and not everyone likes that glossy screen. Ultimately, the screens in both of these laptops are pretty good. All things considered, it's hard to pick a winner. They both have their pros and cons, and most of the differences aren't really that big. They both still perform pretty well, run relatively cool, feel nice to use, have good-looking screens, and are smaller and lighter than most others. These two laptops are kind of already in a league of their own. At this point, it feels a bit like we're just splitting hairs. I would be equally happy taking either of these laptops to use daily, but if I had to pick one, personally, I'd be leaning towards the Legion. I don't mind the slightly bigger machine to get the extra performance, and I think the biggest and most important difference between these two laptops is that this one has upgradable memory. Of course, you can reduce that as an issue by spending more money to get the 32GB Zephyrus, but there's no getting around the fact that the Legion is more flexible in that regard. But if that's not an issue for you, then yeah, the G16's battery life is certainly very attractive. But let me know which one you would pick down in the comments. And if you want more information on either of these gaming laptops, then check out the full reviews here. I go into a little more depth in those, which might help you make the final choice before pulling the trigger. So I'll see you in one of those next.